Hello, welcome to video number 5. This is a series of videos. Not sure how many videos there's going to be in this series yet, but we are attempting to put down some ideas that I've accumulated over the past 30 years or so, having to do with what can we do about conditions that we may have in our life that we don't like. What you might call unwanted conditions, and what can we do about it? And so this has been a discussion to try to convey some ideas of what are the factors in life that influence the way our life occurs, and as I say, what can we do about it? If we've got things in our life that we don't particularly care for or don't wish to have in our life, what can we do about it? How can we create change in our life? So if you're getting to this video and have not seen the previous videos, please go back and start at beginning with video number 1. Some of these things we're talking about may not make a lot of sense unless you've had a chance to be exposed to some of the ideas that we've discussed before. My name is Gary. That's not especially important. As you can see, I am not a professional spokesperson. I am not a professional speaker. Not really comfortable with the public speaking idea. I have struggled a little bit with doing these videos because it's not really in my nature to be forthcoming and outspoken. So the videos up to this point have perhaps maybe not been entertaining or exciting, but we hope to be able to offer something that has value. And if you will bear with me as I go through these discussions, I hope that we will be able to reach a point where you'll find some benefits from these things that I'm talking about. Because if I haven't said it, what ended up from coming out of all of the history, the years of studying and searching for solutions and answers, I did find certain ideas and I guess what we might say is solutions of what actually works, and have managed to implement that in such a way that it produces very good results. Okay, so continuing, the idea I was trying to convey was where we are in this process, this progress in this series of videos. So we began with the very basic idea of what is it that influences our life and determines what kind of experiences that we have in our life. And we talked about the few principles involved there. We had another video where we talked about the basic idea of that a lot of this begins from early childhood, from the time that we're born, and the effects of the experiences that we have during those first few years of childhood plays a big part in how our life looks later on through life. And I'll be elaborating on how all this fits together in a little more detail later on. Then I talked a little bit about some of the other types of materials that are out there. I think some of that was sometimes I get frustrated overhearing some of the things that are discussed and offered as advice, and are things that I've been through and have not found those things to be effective or beneficial as far as actually generating change. And we may get into some of those discussions in a little more detail later. So I think what I really had in mind today is to go into a little more detailed discussion on a little deeper level and talk about the subconscious. And because we are really not told much or at least not in the public, we're not told much about the role that our subconscious plays in our life. In fact, I think a lot of people really don't actually understand what the subconscious is. I encounter that sometimes. People think unconscious. What does that mean? What is that? What is this unconscious? And we're not talking about unconscious. We're talking about the subconscious, which is it's another aspect of the mind. And so we have what we could think of as three levels to our beingness, if you will. The part of us that we think of as our normal day-to-day awareness is, or the what I might call the waking mind, is just one part. There is a higher part that we maybe could call the higher self. That's our spiritual aspect. And we're not going to get into a whole lot of that right now. But the part we were going to talk about today is the subconscious, which is the part that's going on under the surface that we're not aware of, which actually is the vast majority of the capacity or capabilities of our consciousness or the mind. And this occurs on a level below what we are aware of. We're not actually aware of the subconscious at all for the most part. But we could think of, if you think of a diagram of an iceberg, which you have probably seen, that the part that sticks up above the surface of the water on an iceberg is very small in comparison to the overall space of the iceberg. And the majority of the body of the iceberg itself is below the surface of the water. So you may have seen pictures that were kind of like something like this. It was an iceberg, and there was just a little tiny fraction that's above the water, and the majority of it is below the surface of the water. This is actually the way our mind is arranged as well, or the consciousness, and that what we think of as being us is actually a very small part of our overall whole being, and that our waking mind is actually a very small part of us. And the majority of what's actually keeping us going is this part that's below the surface that we're not aware of, the subconscious. Now, the subconscious has a number of things that it performs, duties it performs, we could say. And a lot of this, the things that the subconscious is doing is about managing the various things, the various functions that we need in order to live and function. So for our physical aspect, the physical body, it's managing a lot of these automatic things that happen that we are really don't think about or not aware of, things like what is called the autonomic functions. So you have things like breathing. If we had to stop and maintain and focus our attention on making our breathing work, we would not be able to get much else done. Excuse me. But there are other automatic functions like breathing that happens, and the blood, our heart keeps pumping blood and circulates through our system. All these things happen automatically. The transmission of signals through our nervous system. These all happen automatically, but they don't just happen all by themselves. They must be managed. And this is part of what the subconscious is providing, is it's managing all of these automatic functions so that we don't actually have to have our attention on them to make sure that we're still breathing when we're supposed to be and that the blood is still pumping and doing what it needs to do, so that we almost have an automatic system, almost like a vehicle, if you will, that our consciousness is dwelling in, that allows us to have this impression of being this person in a body. So there are many functions that the subconscious is carrying on a regular basis, but it goes beyond just managing the physical body. It manages many other things as well. It manages our memories from the past, for example. It keeps a record of all of the memories and our experiences, much like a librarian manages all the records, all the books in the library. It also manages a lot of our interpretations of things. It influences our opinions, our views, our interpretations, the way we see things, the way we interpret our experiences, and the value systems that we've accumulated and chosen and that we tend to stand by. And it manages all of these things and influences our attitudes, it influences our behaviors, and it influences a lot of what we think or consider to be our thoughts. So a lot of what most of us think of as being our thoughts that are occurring as we go through life during the day, these things are actually coming from the subconscious. Now, this may surprise some, and it may not surprise others. Not sure. Or it may seem like, well, yeah, this is fairly obvious, but what does this mean as how this applies to our experience of life? And this is what we're going to delve into a little more. We could think of the subconscious as being a lot like the operating system on a computer. So if we'll think about it a little bit, the computer system or the operating system on the computer is managing, controlling all the various things that are going on in the computer system. So the computer has a hard drive that stores the information and provides the means to have access to that information. And then there's the motherboard, and then there's various devices on the motherboard that communicate with, say, for example, the video monitor, or communicates with outside sources like the internet. And the operating system provides the instructions to the system that the system needs to be able to perform all these various functions that the computer operates. And so in the operating system, there are various programs that are stored on the computer that perform different types of functions. Some of them may be, for example, we might have a program for creating and managing the file system, for example, or we may have programs that create text documents, or Word documents they're called. We may have some other programs that do other things like producing art, or some others that produce music or videos. And all these programs, various different types of programs, do various different types of things on the system. So as we think about our computer, we may have a program, if the program works well, that as we're sitting at the keyboard looking at our monitor, we put in some instructions and tell it what we would like for it to do. If the program is doing what it needs to be, or working, functioning properly, then it will produce a result that corresponds to the instructions that we gave it. But sometimes there can be certain types of programs that don't function well, and some of those programs may actually break down and crash, or there may be other programs that are what are called virus programs. They're actually intended to create results that are not beneficial. So, and then this is kind of an important part too, is that there are a lot of files in the operating system of the computer that are actually controlling, or that have to do with the controls of the system itself. And those files or programs are often kept in a specialized area of the system, and it's more or less kept away from the view of the person who uses the computer. And they're generally considered to be that are called critical system files, and they often will have a protection that's put into place to prevent somebody from tampering with the system accidentally, even the user, from tampering with the system that might cause the system to fail or to not function correctly. So as I'm describing these things, there's a reason, in that there are similar things that the subconscious does in our lives as humans. It's actually very similar to the functions of the operating system on the computer. So let's carry this a little further. So when we are born, we come into this world as humans, there's a process that we're going through for the first several years that I mentioned earlier, and that I discussed as that we are having an ongoing process of evaluating our surroundings and forming opinions and interpretations of what we think is happening in our surroundings, in the events that we're experiencing. Now, this process is going on for about 6 years. Now, the subconscious is keeping a record of this process. So as this newborn child, as we observe something and form an interpretation, and we decide that this is what is so, and or whatever conclusion it is that we come to, the subconscious records that and stores it within the operating system. Much like the system on a computer. So for some and to carry that analogy a little further, when you first start up a new computer, you're presented with this process that you go through where you're choosing how you set up the computer, you're choosing various capabilities, factors, functions of the computer, and what is sometimes called a configuration. In fact, there is usually a very critical file in the system called a configuration file, which holds all of the command structures for how the system is going to operate. So we could think of the subconscious as actually having something we could think of as this configuration process, that as we are choosing perceptions, these get recorded by the subconscious and become what I'm referring to these days now as this configuration process. We could also compare this to something like a video game, which I'm not really familiar with video games, but what little I am aware of is that often when you first begin a video game, there is a process in the beginning where you choose the capabilities and the characteristics of your character, the avatar as it's called. And I would call this a configuration process, right? So, and you're choosing like perhaps what the avatar looks like or what they're able to do. You're choosing various qualities, capabilities, and accessories perhaps for this character. So what I'm suggesting is that we humans, when we come into this world, we're going through a very similar process that we don't really understand what is happening. But what is happening is that we are choosing our perceptions, we're choosing how we interpret the world around us, and we're choosing the how we have determined to see ourselves, how we are determined to see life in the world around us. So we're choosing many things. And a large part of what it is that we're choosing is what is it that we believe. Although, oddly enough, we're not really, no one's, well, yeah, I'll say hardly anyone actually understands that this is what's happening. But when we have experiences, we respond to these experiences, and we may form emotional responses, and we'll form thoughts, or these what I call interpretations, where we say, well, we think this is, this means this, or this means that, and then we come to some kind of a conclusion about what we believe or what we choose to decide is what is true. And whatever that is that we have decided is what is true, I've come to understand as being the beliefs that we have and that are formed. Those beliefs are being recorded by the subconscious, and I stored in a very special place in the subconscious that is like those critical system files that I was referring to on the computer, and are kept in a protective manner so that those instruction files, the belief files, cannot be changed or tampered with indirectly or by accident or by somebody else, by some kind of outside forces. So we could think of this as being behind something like a firewall in the computer system, or in a password protected area where one would have to have the special, what we might call admin, in computer world, admin access to these particular files to be able to access and change them. So we may be thinking, okay, so what? Why? What does it matter? Well, it matters a lot, because the conclusions that we come to during this process becomes the basis of how the subconscious manages our life and the experiences that we have. Basically from the point of about 6 years old onward. And we'll be talking a little bit more about the thing that we want to, well, this is a key part of what affects it has to do with where these conditions that we talked about that are unwanted conditions that we might have in our life, where they get formed and how they get in our life and get stuck there, and then affect our life, producing conditions in our life that we don't want. Well, this scenario that I'm describing about the subconscious during this early period of childhood is where those things come from. So, as a child, a very young child, as we had an experience of some kind that maybe provoked an uncomfortable response of some kind, an emotional response of some kind, and then what goes along with that is we have this thought process where we kind of form these interpretations of what does it mean. And then we come to a conclusion of what it is that's true, what it means about ourselves. And that becomes recorded by the subconscious, and the subconscious then takes those conclusions as instructions, more or less like a blueprint or a set of instructions to then create the conditions that we then experience to live. Now, the thing is that the conclusions that we came to can be infinitely variable for each individual person. So they're going to look different for every person. But what we want to start to learn, or start to get a sense of seeing and understanding, is that what we chose and decided during this period becomes what we experience later. So if the conclusions, the belief systems that we form during this process are healthy and supportive and work well in the world, it's things like the world is safe and supportive and I can do what I want and I can have what I want, or do whatever it is that I choose to do, and the world will support that, or that we have these perceptions and beliefs that, you know, the world is abundant and there is plenty of everything for my needs, then that's what this person will experience, and things are pretty much okay. But if, on the other hand, if the person happened to be one of those who chose a different posture of the conclusions that they came to, that might be something like, I can't have, or life is not safe, or I'm not loved, I'm not accepted, and many others that we may get into a little more detail. I'm starting to run low on time here. That then those become the instructions that the subconscious then creates and builds our life to become. So then for that person, life is hard. And life is a lot about scarcity and limitation and not good enough and not worthy. And so this becomes the basis of what a lot of these patterns, what I'm calling these undesirable, unwanted subconscious patterns that we might have called issues in the past. And they've been described as many different things, and I talked about that a little bit, I believe, in the last video, where I was describing a lot of these different conditions that we could have, whether it's low self-esteem, or having triggers, or procrastination, self-sabotage, self-limitation, whatever those patterns are that we would kind of call undesirable, whatever those patterns are based on this scenario that I'm describing right here, of that during this period of time in early childhood, that as we had experiences and formed these conclusions and drew the conclusion of what we believe to be true, become those beliefs, which then form how our experience of life occurs. And this is a key factor in starting to understand, how do we do something about changing these conditions that we may have showing up, if we happen to be one of the folks that have conditions that we don't particularly wish to have. So I am running very low, very close to running out of time here, so I need to wrap this up. So I hope we were able to cover this subject and give a good understanding that this thing of the subconscious is very important, and it plays a very, very big role in how our life occurs. And so then we're going to move on into the next level. We can start bringing together some of these different ideas and factors to start looking at what is it that we can do about these patterns, that I call them, so that we can create some change in our life. All right, so hopefully I'll see you here again for, maybe I won't see you here, but maybe you'll see me here for the next video. Thanks, bye.